My name is Claire Whitfield, and 3 hours ago, a police officer told me my husband, Daniel, was in surgery and might not survive the night. I'm 32. Run a small bakery in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind with a bell over the door and flour permanently ground into the floorboards. Daniel and I built that house together, the one with the blue shutters on Larkspur Lane, 5 years ago. Back when we had nothing but a mortgage and a lot of hope. I painted the nursery a soft yellow 18 months ago, before the miscarriage. We never repainted it. Tonight, Daniel's truck hydroplaned off Route 9 in the rain. A trucker found him and called it in. By the time I got to Mercy General, they'd already wheeled him back for emergency surgery. Internal bleeding. A collapsed lung. The surgeon said, critical, the way you'd say the weather is bad, flat. Careful, already bracing me for something worse. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours doing the thing you do when your body won't let you do anything else. Staring at a vending machine, memorizing the hum of the lights. Then Daniel's mother, Marilyn, arrived with his sister, Paige, and Paige's husband, Kyle. I stood to hug Marilyn. She patted my back once, stiffly, the way you'd pat a stranger's dog. They sat across the room from me. Not beside me, across. I went to the vending machine for water I didn't want, mostly to move my legs. And that's when I heard Marilyn's voice through the gap in the doors of the little family consultation room next door. Low, but not low enough. If he doesn't make it, the house needs to come back to this family. It was never really hers to begin with. Paige's voice, quieter. Mom, he's not even out of surgery. I'm being practical. Paige, Daniel put that house in both their names before we could stop him. If she stays a widow in that house, we lose Ray's land value forever. Kyle already talked to a lawyer. There are ways to contest it if something happens to him. Kyle's voice, low and certain. There's a window. Before she thinks to change anything herself. I stood very still with a bottle of water sweating cold against my palm, and something in my chest went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with grief. They didn't know I could hear them. They didn't know I'd spent 5 years designing kitchens for other people's peace of mind and could read a blueprint, a contract, or a room full of liars with the same eye. By the time the surgeon came out to tell me Daniel was stable, I had already decided what I was going to do that night, and it didn't involve telling a single one of them. I didn't cry in that hallway. I've learned crying is loud, and loud things get noticed. Instead, I asked the nurse when I could see him, and she said not for hours. He was still in recovery, still under. So I told Marilyn I needed air, and I walked straight to my car and sat there in the dark with my hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere. I design kitchens for a living. People think it's about cabinets and countertops, but really it's about listening. A client tells you what they want, and you learn to hear what they're actually afraid of. Marilyn had just told me, without meaning to, exactly what she was afraid of. Losing Ray's land. Losing control of a house she never wanted me to have in the first place. I thought about the day Daniel added my name to that deed. His mother had gone quiet for a week afterward. The kind of quiet that isn't peace, just planning. I hadn't understood it then. I understood it now. Sitting in a hospital parking. A lattice 11 at night with my husband, unconscious, 2 floors above me. I drove home. The house was dark. The porch light Daniel always forgot to leave on, off as usual. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the key hooks by the door. Daniel's spare, mine, and the one Marilyn had made a copy of years ago for emergencies. Back when we still trusted the word, I called a locksmith. Not the nearest one. I called David Reyes, a friend from church who owed me a favor after I catered his daughter's wedding for free. I told him it was urgent, that Daniel was in the hospital, that I needed every lock on the house changed that night. He didn't ask why. He just said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I did something else. I went into the study and found the fireproof folder where we kept the deed, the will, Daniel's power of attorney paperwork, the one naming me, not his mother, as his medical and financial decision maker, if he couldn't speak for himself. I read it twice under the desk lamp to be sure. Then I photographed every page with my phone. David arrived, and by 1 in the morning, every lock in that house was new. Front door, back door, the side door off the garage that Marilyn had used for 15 years. Like she still owned the place. I was locking the garage door myself when my phone lit up on the counter. Marilyn, calling it in 1:14 a.m. I let it ring twice before I answered. And when I did, her voice was already sharp. "Claire, where are you?" "Daniel's awake and he's asking for his house keys." My heart dropped and lifted in the same second. Daniel was awake, but something in Marilyn's sentence snagged before the relief could land. His house keys. Not asking for me. Not asking if he was okay to see visitors. His mother calling at 1:14 in the morning, already fixed on keys. "I'm on my way," I said, and hung up before she could ask anything else. I drove back to Mercy General with my hands steady on the wheel, which surprised me. Daniel was in a regular room now, pale, and the fourth taped to the back of his hand. A bruise blooming along his jaw. When I walked in, his eyes found mine first, before his mother's, before Paige's, and something in my chest loosened for the first time in 6 hours. "Hey," he said, voice like gravel. "They said I was lucky." "You were," I said, and I kissed his forehead, careful of the bandage near his temple. Marilyn was standing at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed. And she didn't wait long. "Claire, where have you been? Daniel's been asking why you didn't answer sooner." I hadn't, not once, but I let that sit. "I was at the house," I said simply. "Getting things ready for when he comes home." "At 1 in the morning?" Paige asked, not unkindly, just curious. "I had the locks changed," I said. Watching Marilyn's face, the way you watch a pot you suspect is about to boil over. After what happened tonight, I didn't want to come home to a house I wasn't sure it was secure. Any house on a road like Route 9, you start thinking about safety. It wasn't a lie. The truth wasn't the whole truth. And I learned that night that those were two very different things. Marilyn's jaw tightened just slightly, just enough. "You changed the locks tonight before you even knew if he'd wake up." "I did," I said. Daniel, groggy, glanced between us. "Locks? Why does that matter, right?" "It doesn't," I said quickly, squeezing his hand. "Rest, that's all that matters right now." But Marilyn was still looking at me, and for the first time in 5 years of stiff hugs and polite distance, she looked at me like she was recalculating something. Like a woman who just realized the numbers on her spreadsheet didn't add up the way she'd planned. She excused herself to get coffee with Kyle. And the second the door swung shut behind them, Paige leaned close to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, before you go home tonight, there's something you need to know about what." Kyle's lawyer already started filing, and I don't think Daniel knows either. Paige's hand was shaking slightly around her paper coffee cup. I'd known my sister-in-law for 5 years as the quiet one, the one who agreed with her mother to keep the peace. I'd never seen her look afraid of her own family before. "What filing?" I asked, keeping my voice low, my eyes on the door. 2 weeks ago, Paige said, Kyle took Mom to see a lawyer. Not for a will, for guardianship, a conservatorship petition, in case Daniel was ever incapacitated. Mom would be named his legal guardian. Financial decisions, medical decisions, everything, including the house. The floor seemed to tilt slightly under me. "Daniel is conscious. He's talking. He doesn't need a guardian." "I know that," Paige whispered. "But the petition was already drafted before tonight." Kyle said if something happened, if Daniel was ever unresponsive, even temporarily, even in surgery, they'd have grounds to file emergency paperwork. Tonight, for a few hours, he was exactly that, unresponsive, in surgery, and Mom knew it. I thought of the fireproof folder sitting on my passenger seat, photographed page by page at 1 in the morning. Daniel's power of attorney, naming me. I'd done that instinctively, not knowing exactly what I was protecting against. Now I understood I'd been racing something already in motion. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You've never gone against her before." Paige's eyes filled and she wiped them fast, like she was embarrassed to still have feelings about any of this. Because I watched Kyle talk about my brother like he was already gone, Claire. Like Daniel was just a name on a deed to be managed. And because 6 years ago, when my marriage was falling apart, you were the only one in this family who called to check on me instead of asking what it would cost everyone else. I don't forget things like that. The door opened before I could answer. Marilyn stepped back in, 2 coffees in hand. Her composure fully restored, sliding one toward Paige like nothing had happened. They said he needs to rest. Visiting hours are basically over. Claire, you should go home and sleep. You've had a long night. I looked at Daniel, drowsy again, his eyes fluttering shut under the sedative. I looked at Marilyn, smiling the same smile she'd given me at our wedding, warm on the surface, calculating underneath. And I finally understood I'd been reading it wrong for 5 years. It wasn't disapproval. It was patience. She'd simply been waiting. You're right, I said, gathering my coat. I should go home. I didn't tell her I already had an appointment booked for 8 in the morning, with a lawyer of my own. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof folder open in front of me and a legal pad I hadn't used since I redesigned my own bakery's floor plan. And I made a list the way I make every hard decision, line by line. No emotion allowed near the ink. At 8 a.m., I sat across from a lawyer named Priya and Hund, recommended by a friend who'd gone through her own ugly divorce. I laid out everything, the overheard conversation, the guardianship petition Paige had warned me about, the power of attorney already naming me. The locks had changed less than 12 hours earlier. Priya listened without interrupting, which I respected immediately. When I finished, she leaned back. First, the power of attorney you have is solid, dated, signed, witnessed. As long as Daniel remains capable of expressing his own wishes, no one can file for guardianship over him. That petition Kyle drafted only has teeth if Daniel is deemed incapacitated by a doctor. Right now, he's talking. He's lucid. That door is closed. Relief hit me so hard I had to breathe through it. Second, she continued, the house. Both your names are on the deed. No one, not his mother, not his sister's husband, has any legal claim to it while either of you is alive. That conversation you overheard in the hospital wasn't a plan with power. It was a plan hoping you wouldn't notice it happening. So they can't touch it. Not through guardianship. But Claire, she paused, choosing her words carefully. People like this don't stop because a door closes. They look for another door. I get ahead of it, formally, in writing, today. I left her office with a folder of my own now, a letter, drafted and ready, to be sent to Marilyn, Kyle, and Paige, stating plainly that any further attempt to interfere with Daniel's medical or financial affairs would be treated as a legal matter, not a family one. I drove straight to the hospital instead of sending it. Daniel was more alert, sitting up, color back in his face. When I told him everything, the overheard conversation, the guardianship filing, my night with the locksmith, I watched something in his expression shift from confusion to a quiet, controlled anger I'd never seen aimed at his own mother before. She filed paperwork, he said slowly, while I was in surgery, to take control of my life. Of our house. I didn't want to tell you like this. Not while you're still. No, he said, gripping my hand harder than I expected for a man 3 days out for a man. Surgery. I need to know everything. Every single thing they've done. Because I think it's time my family finally understood something about me they've always underestimated. The door opened. Marilyn walked in, smiling, holding a vase of flowers, and stopped cold when she saw the folder sitting open on Daniel's lap. Marilyn's smile didn't fully drop, it just froze, the way a picture does when the video glitches. She set the vase down slowly on the windowsill. What's that? Sit down, Mom, Daniel said. His voice was still rough from the ventilator, but it had a steadiness in it I hadn't heard directed at her in years. She didn't sit. Daniel, you need rest, not stress. Whatever Claire's told you. Claire didn't tell me anything I can't verify myself, he said. Priya Anand faxed the guardianship filing to my room 20 minutes ago. Kyle's name is on it as the petitioner. Yours is on it as the proposed guardian. Dated 12 days ago. Before the accident, the silence that followed was the kind you could hear the machines breathing through. That was precautionary, Marilyn finally said, her chin lifting. Any responsible mother plans ahead. You have no idea what it's like to watch your son struggle financially while his wife plays with flour and frosting. Instead of getting a real, the bakery clears more than Kyle's contracting business has in 3 years, Daniel said flatly. I've seen both our books, Mom. I do the taxes. Marilyn's mouth opened, then closed. I had never in 5 years seen her without a ready sentence. This isn't about money, she tried again. It's about family staying together, staying protected. You wanted to be my guardian, Daniel said, cutting through it. While I was unconscious, not to protect me, to control the house before Claire could think to protect herself. Paige told her everything, Mom. Last night, in this hospital. Marilyn's head snapped toward the door as if Paige might be standing there to defend herself. She wasn't. She had no right. She had every right, Daniel said. She's the only one in this family who called this what it actually was. I watched something crumble behind Marilyn's eyes. Not guilt, not yet, but the particular panic of a person watching a plan they'd protected for weeks come apart in a hospital room with witnesses. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she had the night before over the question of the locks. You did this, she said quietly. You turned my own children against me. No, I said, and I kept my voice level, the way I do when a client's kitchen. Renovation has gone over budget and someone needs to hear a hard number without flinching. You did this 12 days before your son's accident. I only made sure it didn't work. Marilyn's hand found the doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. And then, in a voice gone suddenly small, she said the one thing I never expected to hear from her in that room. There's something else in that filing you haven't read yet, Daniel. Something about your father's will. And once you see it, you won't be looking at me like the villain anymore. Daniel went very still. What about Dad's will? Marilyn's composure had cracked, but something colder slid into place behind it, the look of a woman deciding, in real time, which version of the truth would still let her win. Your father left more than the lake house to this family, Daniel. There was a life insurance policy, $200,000. He named you as sole beneficiary the year before he died. Daniel frowned. I never received any insurance payout. There wasn't one. You told us he'd let the policy lapse. I told you that, Marilyn said, because I used it to keep Kyle's company from going under 3 years ago. I was meant to pay it back before you ever needed to know. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with hospital machines. I watched. Daniel's face was in the math his mother had spent 3 years hoping he'd never do. $200,000 of his father's memory, spent without his knowledge, on the same son-in-law who'd just tried to strip him of his own house while he lay unconscious in surgery. You stole from me, Daniel said slowly, to fund Kyle, and then Kyle tried to help you take my house, so I'd never noticed the first theft. I wasn't going to let you notice, Marilyn said, and for the first time her voice actually broke. I was going to fix it quietly. The guardianship was never really about the house, Daniel. If I controlled your finances even briefly, I could move money back where it belonged before you ever saw a bank statement. Nobody would have been hurt. I would have been hurt, Daniel said. I am hurt right now. I stood there holding the folder Priya had prepared, and understood in that moment that everything Marilyn had done, the guardianship petition, the lawyer, the timing built around a hospital bed, had never really been about me at all. It had been about hiding a debt she owed her own son, using his accident as cover to fix it before he could ask questions. Daniel turned to me, his hand tightening around mine. Claire, I want everything. Every document Priya has. Every bank record going back 3 years. I want to know exactly what my mother did with my father's money. and exactly how far Kyle was willing to go to make sure I never found out. Marilyn's face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with hospital lighting. Daniel, please. If you pull those records, it won't just be me exposed. Kyle's business, Paige's marriage, it will all come apart. Daniel didn't blink. Then I hope you're ready, because tomorrow morning, Priya and I are going to find out exactly whose name is on that insurance company's original paperwork, and whether that signature releasing the funds to Kyle's company was actually mine. It took 3 weeks for Priya's investigator to pull the original insurance paperwork. What we found wasn't just theft, it was forgery. The release form authorizing the payout to be redirected into Kyle's business account carried a signature that was supposed to be Daniel's. It wasn't. Marilyn had signed her own son's name 3 years earlier, while he was traveling for work, and never thought to check the account she'd told him didn't exist. Daniel didn't yell when Priya laid it out for him. He just went very quiet, the way I imagine his father used to go, quiet, before he made a decision. That couldn't be undone. He didn't press criminal charges. That surprised me more than anything else in this whole ordeal. She's still my mother, he told me the night he decided, sitting on our porch with the new locks gleaming faintly under the light. But quiet doesn't mean nothing happens. What happened was this. Daniel had Priya draft a full repayment agreement, $200,000, with interest to be repaid from Kyle's business over 5 years, secured against Kyle's own commercial property, not ours. Marilyn was removed as any kind of decision-maker in Daniel's affairs, permanently, in writing, notarized, unambiguous. And the guardianship petition Kyle had filed was formally withdrawn, on record, with Kyle's own signature admitting it had been filed without cause. Marilyn tried once to explain herself to me directly, cornering me at the mailbox on a Tuesday, telling me she'd only ever wanted to protect her family. I thought about the vending machine, the low voices through the gap in the door. The words never really hurts to begin with. You didn't want to protect your family, I told her. You wanted to protect yourself from a debt you created, and you were willing to use your son's accident to do it. I changed the locks that night because some part of me already knew that. I just didn't have proof yet. She didn't have an answer for that. She got in her car and drove away, and she hasn't tried to explain herself since. Paige and I are close now, in the way people become close after they've stood on the same side of something hard. Kyle's business survived, barely, humbled and monitored. Marilyn sees Daniel twice a year, at holidays, in careful, supervised doses of family that used to be unconditional and now has to be earned. Back one visit at a time. Daniel healed. The scar along his ribs is the only reminder most days. We repainted the nursery a pale green last spring, not because Kyle's were expecting, but because yellow had started to feel like waiting, and green felt like moving forward. The locks on our house are still the ones David installed that night. I've never seen a reason to change them again. Some doors, once you finally close them properly, are supposed to stay that way.